You know, what's the real difference between a project that totally soars and one that, well, just crashes and burns? It doesn't matter if you're building a skyscraper, launching a new app, or even just designing a business process. It all comes down to having a solid blueprint. And today we're going to break that blueprint down and figure out how to build systems that actually, work.
But before we get to the solutions, let's start with the big nagging question. We've all seen it, right? A project with a fantastic idea, a super talented team, all the resources in the world, and it still just fails to deliver. How does this happen so often?
Well, the answer, more often than not, is that the very first step went sideways, figuring out what you're actually supposed to be building. When that goes wrong, the consequences are kind of disastrous. The project just bleeds money and blows past every deadline. The final thing you deliver, not what anyone actually needed. And even if it technically works, it can be unreliable, a nightmare to maintain, and the team's reputation, well, it takes a serious hit.
Okay, so how do we avoid that whole mess? It all kicks off by mastering the art of asking the right questions, of discovering what is really needed. And this isn't just some box you check. It is the absolute foundation for everything else that comes next.
Now, the fundamental building block for our blueprint is something called a system requirement. It sounds formal, but all it really is a clear description of what a system needs to do, the features it ought to have, and any limits or constraints it has to work within. Getting these right is absolutely crucial.
And listen, not all requirements are created equal. We basically split them into two main types. Functional requirements are all about what the system does, a specific feature, like add an item to a shopping cart. Non-functional requirements are about how it does it. Things like how fast the page loads, how secure the data is, or how easy it is to use. You absolutely need both for a project to succeed. So to dig up these requirements, one of the best tools is just a good old-fashioned interview. But here's the thing, there's a trade-off. You can ask open-ended questions like, hey, tell me about your typical workday. You'll get rich, deep details, but it can take a while. Or you can ask closed questions like, how many times a day do you perform this task? Which are super efficient, but you might miss the bigger context. The real skill is knowing which one to use and when.
And it's not just the questions you ask, but how you organize them. You can use a pyramid structure, where you start with really specific, closed questions to get things rolling, and then you broaden out to the more open-ended topics. Or you can do the exact opposite, a funnel, where you start with those big, general questions and slowly narrow your focus down to the nitty-gritty details.
Asking questions is great, but at some point, talk is cheap, right? You have to stop telling people about the idea and start showing them. And that's where the incredible power of prototyping comes in, turning all those abstract conversations into something real that people can actually see and touch. It's about making the future tangible.
And there are a few different ways to prototype, each with its own job. You could build what's called a patched-up prototype. Think of it as a working model held together with digital duct tape. It works, but it's not pretty. Or you can make a non-operational one, which just shows the screens without any real logic behind them, perfect for testing a workflow. A first of a series is basically a fully working pilot version, and then a selected features prototype is where you just build a few key pieces to test your most important ideas.
So why go to all this trouble? Well, prototyping is basically your ultimate risk reduction strategy. It gives you a chance to make changes early on, back when they're cheap and easy to make. It lets you kill a bad idea before you've sunk way too much time and money into it. And most importantly, it helps you build something people will actually use because they've already had their hands on it.
And here's the crucial rule of thumb. For a prototype to be worth anything, people have to be able to use it easily. That means focusing on the user interface isn't optional. I mean, if they can't figure it out, you're not going to get the feedback you desperately need to move forward. It's as simple as that.
So we've got these tools, interviews and prototypes, and they're powerful. But tools are only as good as the mindset you use to guide them. And that brings us to this total game changer, a revolutionary shift in thinking called the Agile mindset.
At its heart, Agile is really built on 4 simple but incredibly powerful values. First, constant communication with your team and your customers. Next, a commitment to simplicity in your design. A deep, deep reliance on feedback to steer your work. And finally, the courage to make changes and trust your team.
And this right here is the most radical idea of them all. See, traditional methods try to fight against change. They see it as a costly problem. Agile, on the other hand, welcomes change. It's a total mental shift. It's about accepting that you're going to learn as you go and that the plan should change as you get smarter.
So those values lead to some very practical principles.
Instead of one giant delivery at the very end, you deliver working software in small, frequent pieces. Customers and developers, they're not in separate buildings. They work together every single day. You learn to trust motivated teams to organize themselves, and you always prioritize a real conversation over a 100-page document.
So, that's the philosophy. But what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, let's check out one of the most popular ways to put Agile into action, a framework called Scrum.
In Scrum, you don't write massive requirements documents. No way. Instead, you capture needs on these simple little things called user story cards. And this small change is huge because it forces everyone to think in terms of empathy. What does the user want and why? Instead of just making a long laundry list of features.
The whole process is organized into this repeating cycle, this rhythm. It all starts with a big master list of ideas and user stories called the product backlog. From that list, the team grabs a small chunk of the highest priority work. That becomes their sprint backlog, and it's their only focus for a short, intense burst of work.
So let's break down that cycle, the sprint. First, that big list gets prioritized. Then the team picks a handful of things they're confident they can finish. They work for a fixed amount of time, holding a quick daily meeting, the daily scrum, just to stay in sync. And at the end, the goal is to deliver a real working piece of the product. And then, the whole cycle starts right over again.
And how long is a sprint? Typically no more than 30 days. In fact, a lot of teams work in even shorter cycles, like 1 or 2 weeks. The key is that the time is fixed. That forces everyone to focus, and it creates this steady, predictable rhythm of delivery.
Okay, so if you pull all of this together, what's the big takeaway? It's this. Building great systems isn't about creating some perfect, unchangeable plan from the very start. It's about creating a process that allows you to constantly listen, learn, and adapt as you go. The plan is a guide, not a contract that's set in stone.
And these are some of the hard-won lessons from this whole approach. Short, frequent releases mean the system evolves based on real-world feedback, not just guesswork. Having the customer literally right there with the team is a win-win. They get what they actually want, and the team doesn't waste time building the wrong thing. And focusing on a sustainable work pace, that's not about being lazy. It's about recognizing that quality work comes from focused, well-rested people.
Ultimately, the entire philosophy is really captured right here in this quote. It's a team sport. The focus is on delivering a successful project together. It's a shift away from individual heroics and toward collective ownership and, shared success.
Look, this way of thinking, of listening, prototyping, and adapting in short cycles, it completely revolutionized the software world. But these principles are universal. They're bigger than just code. So the final question I want to leave you with is this. What could this blueprint change for you?